We can share information, knowledge, views, expertise, and best practices, and providing relevant evidence, including from data and research findings, assessments, even the evaluation of previous relevant policies. It facilitates open, inclusive, and informed decision-making debates among key stakeholders. So the forum is supported by distinguished experts as panel members, and these members facilitate policy choices made by African governments in order to accelerate progress towards food security and improved nutrition, identifies areas of progress and positive change and best practices across the continent. I see our Malabo Montpellier Forum as a premier platform in 5 years from now that plays a major role to make the food systems function very well in our mother continent, Africa.
What we could probably do in the forum is to stay focused, to keep mobilization and enthusiasm alive among all the stakeholders in order to pave the way for the tremendous changes that have to take place in order to make the food system transformation a reality on the ground. In my opinion, the centrality of the food systems and their multiple interconnections with the other key systems for sustainable development may offer future opportunities to the youth in order to keep them probably in our continent for the benefit of implementing the ambitious Agenda 2063. And in the process, it can, of course, alter for the better the narrative of our continent.
That's right. This is the Malabo Montpellier Forum, and it's my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome you to this 9th edition, where we will be unveiling recipes for success, policy innovation to transform Africa's food systems and build resilience. We are providing simultaneous interpretation for this meeting, so please click on the globe icon and you have the option of muting the original audio. Join the conversation on social media. Our hashtags are #MaMo panel, #MaMo forum. Without further ado, I will now hand over to Academia 2063's executive chairperson. He is equally co-chair of the Malabo Montpellier panel, Dr. Usman Badian.
Thank you, Lai, and welcome to everybody who's joining us today here. And thank you to those who have in particular accepted to serve as speakers. I start with recognizing and greeting our co-chairs of the forum, Prime Minister Desalegn and Ambassador Alawi. Also, thank you to those who joined us from Morocco, South Africa, from Benin, from the organizations like AFDB, Agra, and others who are here with us. Welcome our colleagues from the Malabo Montpellier panel and my co-chair, Professor Joachim von Braun. Thank you for joining us on this 9th edition of the Malabo Montpellier Forum. We just completed the UN Food Systems Summit last month, and about 2 months ago, and just this month, earlier, the COP26. Both major events, in particular, the UN Food Systems Summit has brought our attention, all of us, the global community, but also in Africa, brought our attention back to what needs to be done over the next 10 years to achieve the ambitions of the global community as well as the African leadership in terms of progress in improving agricultural performance, growth, employment, equity in our society, inclusivity, basically to remind us that no matter how far we have come over the last couple of decades, there's still so much more to be done, not just in terms of level of effort, but the quality of the progress that is being achieved. The quality in terms of ecosystem health, the quality in terms of equality of growth and living conditions, the reduction of vulnerability across segments of the population's inclusivity, social safety nets, but also, just like we found out from COP26, the challenge of safeguarding our livelihoods in the context of changing climate, with no doubt much more complex crises to come. If we needed anything to remind us of how complex things will be in the future, we just look back at the last 18 months dealing with COVID, with all of its ramifications. So there is no greater urgency right now than to fix our field systems, to make them stronger, much more resilient, and to deliver for a growing population. Doing that requires, of course, especially in agriculture and food systems, the most complex systems in our economies, actually. Doing that requires a lot of things from a lot of groups of actors in different ways and in a continuous and consistent manner. That all in itself is a huge challenge. And figuring out what to do and how to do it best is just adding to a very complex situation and making it really, really quite tough to handle. That explains the vision and the interest of the Malabo Montpellier panel, trying to get into the intricacies of what needs to be done, what can be done, what is working on the ground, and how we can move the needle in so many different areas. Over the last 5 years, thanks to many of our colleagues, collaborators, partners in the countries under the leadership of the panel, we've looked at very important areas around the food systems. Whether talking about how to just make sure we can get better nutritional outcomes. With the resources we already have on hand right now, we could have much better nutritional outcomes across Africa and certainly many other parts of the world. We're looking at how do we get productivity going? Is it mechanization? Is it access to water or irrigation? How do you get those going? How do we get energy so we can transform across the value chains? How can we trade better with one another? How do we get to the huge potential of the livestock sector mobilized and deployed? All these different areas we've looked at. We've looked at the food systems themselves, how they're transforming well. And in each one of those areas, we've gone across the continent. We've developed methodologies to rank African countries, look at the best performing countries, go there and see what they are doing that is making them move the needle more than their peers across the continent. What is the government in particular doing? It is government actions here that we're focusing on, because that's what government can do, and that's what government can replicate, that's what they can emulate, that's what they can scale up. So there's a really huge treasure of institutional innovations, policy reforms, programmatic interventions. And what's interesting about the journey of the last 5 years is that almost no country did exactly the same as others. You will find the same elements in most countries, but they may have different approaches based on the local realities to make sure that progress can take place. It is that wealth of information, of evidence about facilitating food system transformation, facilitating policy innovation around agriculture and the food systems that has led to the monograph that is being unveiled here today under the leadership of Dr. Katrin Glatzel and the rest of the team at Academia 2063, at ZEF, at the University of Bonn, at an Imperial College. So thank you and welcome. I look forward to a very, very, very rich debate over the next few hours. And thank you to everybody who's accepted our invitation to join us here today, and in particular, the speakers in the very many sessions that we have ahead of us. Thank you very much. Welcome again, and back to you, Lai.
Thank you very much, Dr. Badian, for those opening remarks. As the executive chair mentioned, today we're going to have 7 fireside chats and 1 high-level roundtable discussion. So we are going to get right into the first round of fireside chats where we will tackle nutrition, irrigation, and mechanization. It is my pleasure to invite the moderator of the first chat, Mr. Tom Arnold, Chair of Irish 2030 Agri-Food Strategy Committee. He's equally a member of the Malabo Montpellier panel. Mr. Tom Arnold, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, indeed, it's a great pleasure to moderate this first session on the hugely important topic of nutrition on the day in which the latest version of the Global Nutrition Report will be published. And it's particularly fitting that I'm speaking to one of the great experts on nutrition today, Dr. Lawrence Haddad, who's the Global Executive Director for the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition Gain. And Lawrence also played a critically important role in the leadership for the Food System Summit. So Lawrence, great to see you again. I have three questions on nutrition which I'd like to pose to you. The first one is that after years of progress, hunger and malnutrition are on the rise again across the world. Africa is facing this challenge particularly acutely. How can governments across the continent re-energize efforts to get back on track to achieve global targets of no hunger and no malnutrition by 2030?
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the co-chairs of the Malabo Montpellier Forum. It's a pleasure to be here. Tom, you asked me a very big question. I want to break it down a little bit, and in the first question, focus a little bit more on hunger, if you don't mind. Partly because I'm so alarmed by the jump in numbers, and partly because I come fresh off the UN Food System Summit, where I think we generated some momentum going forward on hunger. So the first thing to note is just the sheer increase in the numbers. In Africa, FAO and others report a jump from, in the median scenario, 235 million in 2019 to 282 million for Africa in 2020. That's a jump of 20%. So in addition to the sheer human suffering we all know about, this leads to lower economic performance, potential for civil unrest, and the potential for elections not being won. So it's a very, very worrying situation. And I know it's something that leaders in Africa fret about, and as they should. I think what to do to change that, I think first of all is to get the Malabo targets back on track again. I looked at the 2020 biennial report from the AU on the targets, looking at progress between 2015 and 2018. So the data are a little bit out of date now, and I hope they're different. The report says only 4 countries are at the benchmark or have surpassed the benchmark to be on track to meet the commitments of the declaration. And they're Rwanda, our colleagues from Morocco who are on the line, Mali and Ghana. The second thing to do around Malabo is to meet the investment financing in agriculture. It's pretty clear what needs to be done. Of the 49 member states that reported in the 2020 report from the AU, none were on track to meet the investment finance targets. The report itself, and I quote, says the performance of member states against this commitment has been dismal in both review rounds. And third commitment I'd like to highlight is the ending hunger commitment by 2025. And again, only one country, Uganda, is on track to meet this commitment. So the first thing is to accelerate progress towards the Malabo targets. Second thing to do is to not just increase investment for investment's sake, but invest in high impact interventions. And we're so lucky to have a science-based roadmap from colleagues at ZEF, from Sarah's 2030, Academia 2063. We know what the 10 high impact interventions are. That's what we should be, governments, development agencies, donors, private sector, everyone should be aligned around those 10 investment areas. And the final thing I would say, Tom, is please member states do join the Zero Hunger Coalition that came out of the UN Food System Summit. It is being taken forward by the Rome-based agencies. It came out of Action Track 1, and it's to do 3 things, this coalition. It's to advocate, to help you advocate to raise resources and mobilize resources for hunger reduction is to help align resources around these 10 high investment areas, and it's an effort to help add resources. So Tom, that's my answer to your question one.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, you touched upon the Food System Summit, and you played a crucial role in leading that. And I suppose one of the benefits of the Food System Summit is it has got everybody around the world talking about the concept of food systems and how to develop sustainable food systems. So how do we make Africa's food systems more nutritious? And what role do good policies play? And do you have some examples where nutrition policies were particularly innovative and impactful?
Sure, Tom. I mean, my answer to your first question was all about feeding, but really this question is to go beyond feeding towards nourishing people, planet, and prosperity. So some examples of what food systems can do: agricultural R&D spending in Africa. Biofortified crops have only been released. These are crops that are bred using traditional methods, conventional methods, to be staple crops to be high nutrient density in zinc, iron, retinol, etc. These crops have only been released in 7 African countries so far. So here's a very clear, tangible thing, science-based, evidence-based, that can be done. On public procurement, we need more homegrown school feeding programs. Côte d'Ivoire is a fantastic example of that. Homegrown school feeding provides nourishing food for kids so they can learn and focus in school. It stimulates local production, and it reduces the price, increases the availability for everybody in the community for nutritious food. Same around, still on public procurement, social protection. Ethiopia's public productive safety net program is a great example of a very large safety net program that is designed to be more than just an income support. It's designed to help improve nutrition outcomes through a whole range of modalities. I think the other thing I would suggest, Tom, is to focus on, some people call it the missing middle, some people call it the hidden middle, but I like to call it the neglected middle. These are the actors that are between the farm gate and the market, the MSMEs, the micro, small, and medium enterprises that are so critical to get food from one place to another in a way that doesn't promote food loss, doesn't promote food spoilage, and gets food to who needs it at the price they can afford. And I'm thinking of examples like the Cool Coalition that is supported by UNEP and others, and Rwanda is the first country to really establish a cool coalition, cooling system and a center of excellence around cooling systems for food systems. And then in Nigeria, there are so many examples of SME financing and SME support mechanisms. We need much more of these kinds of things, Tom, to make food systems more nutritious.
Lawrence, my final question is one on a subject which I know you care passionately about, and it's this. Women are at the heart of delivering nutrition for families. How can they be best supported in their crucial role?
Thank you, Tom. One of the things the summit told us or taught us was, if you want to have shifts in policies and programs and resource allocations, you have to, first of all, shift mindsets. And I think there are some real problematic mindsets in this space around women's empowerment. Too many people, men and women, see this as a zero-sum game. If you shift resources or power from men to women, or you share resources and power between men and women, that what you give to one, you take away from another. But all the evidence suggests it's the complete opposite. And the evidence is from Africa, from Burkina Faso, from Côte d'Ivoire. It shows that if you rebalance resources towards women, they will grow the pie for everybody, men and women. So that's the first thing. Second thing I would like to see is more reform of the framing legislation around women's status. So I'm using slightly out of date data here from a World Bank 2016 report called Women business and the law. And it shows, for example, 11 of the 32 countries where women cannot apply for a passport, 11 of them are in Africa. 8 of the 18 countries where women need permission to get a job are in Africa. And the only 2 countries where women cannot open a bank account on their own are in Africa. So these framing legislation changes are very important because they will help end gender biased practices. And that's the third thing that needs to happen. Very good evidence from all over the world, not just from Africa, that when women, for example, apply for loans for their businesses, once you control for all the other observational factors, the only thing that's changing the amount of the magnitude of the loan that is awarded to women entrepreneurs is their gender. In other words, men and women have the same proposition to put forward in terms of a loan application, but the women will get 30% less. So we need to end these gender biased practices. And I think the kinds of things that we do that are done to audition players for orchestras, they're done behind a screen, whether it's a man or a woman, what age you are, what nationality you are, it doesn't matter. It's how you play. And I'd like to see more of these gender blind practices applied to business and food systems actors. And finally, Tom, we need to all walk the talk on this. It's not enough to just talk about it. This sort of stuff begins at home. And so what are our organizations, all of us on the line, doing about this? And a new initiative that came out of the Food System Summit from Action Track 1 and from Jemima Njuki, who headed up the gender lever, is this global 50-50 report, which will look at 200 food system actors, public sector and private sector, and it'll look at them and say, how well represented are women in the senior management team? How well represented are women in the board? How sensitive are the programs that the organizations are running towards women's empowerment? How disaggregated are the data that they report against? And this is just beginning to kick off. The first report will be in a year's time. And I strongly encourage all of you to pay attention to it, because your organization will be evaluated and it'll be a strong incentive for you and for all of us, GAIN included, my organization, to improve. So Tom, back to you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence, for those very insightful answers and very detailed answers. So now it's my pleasure to pass the baton on to my friend, Dr. Karim El-Anyouri, who is the Managing Director in the Policy Center for the New South and a member of the Malabo Montpellier panel. Karim, it's a pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be with you. We have like 10 minutes for a quick exchange on a broad topic, irrigation. And we have with us Brian Bozier from Kenya. We'll have same format, 3 questions. Let's have 3 minutes per question on average. So the first one will be, start with the statement, is that Africa has only 6% of its total arable land that is being irrigated, and it's highly concentrated in a couple of countries, actually, compared to 14% in Latin America and 37% in Asia. In your view, what are the main challenges to expanding in irrigation in Africa and doing it in a sustainable way? Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the question. I'm sorry my video is off, but then I hope my audio is well enough to be heard. Yes, so it's really a very interesting question that you've asked. And when you really compare the 3 regions that you've mentioned, there's quite a number of factors that are quite different. And specifically for Africa, one of the things that we notice is number 1, the size of the farms. Number 2, there is the issue around the tenure and land ownership, which then translates into how much investment can actually be put into irrigation in those farmlands. So the first thing that I want to really highlight is how then these factors like the farm size and the land tenure system affects uptake of irrigation. So when you compare the size of farm, for example, in Latin America, and how they've managed to link farm to fork, which means that whatever the farm actually is produced at the farm can actually reach the markets at a better competitive price. That alone is actually an incentive for the farmers to earn something to reinvest in irrigation. And also that gives confidence to the investors within the agriculture space. So if you look at the land ownership in Africa, first of all, most of the farmers are women, but then when it comes to the owners of the land, it's mostly owned by men. So, which means there is a mismatch of where then the investment or the assets that can be used to finance irrigation equipment, for example, or uptake of irrigation technologies by the smallholder farmers. The second aspect is the fact that there is a lot of broken linkages within the whole farm to market value chain. So it's really hard for a farmer to invest, for example, $1,000 or $5,000 in irrigation technology when there is no assured market, or when the market prices are inconsistent. So there has to be some kind of policy change or some kind of action to ensure that whatever that the farmer invests in the farm is also linked to the market. That alone, I think, will really improve the farmer's livelihood and give them an incentive to reinvest in technologies like irrigation. The third aspect is also to look at the farm expertise, the farmer expertise. So irrigation alone is just one of the broken linkages in what can improve productivity in the farm. So we have to look at irrigation as one of the single aspects that farmers need to invest in, but knowledge is also key. Also aspects of soil management or soil degradation, access to markets, access to inputs. So I think all these things are interlinked, and these are some of the barriers for uptake of irrigation in Africa.
Thank you. Showing the complexity of agriculture in general, and of course, these multiple factors that are needed for irrigation to be successful. My second question will be on public policy and what kind of key actions government must take in order to raise irrigation uptake among farmers, and what are some examples on the continent you would like to share with us and you consider as best practices?
Thank you for the question. This is really interesting, and the first thing that when you look into Africa irrigation projects, most of them are actually government-led. These are massive irrigation schemes that over time have been, probably over the past 50 years, that have been implemented by multiple countries. And the latest are Tanzania, we have in Kenya, there's quite a number, but this hasn't really worked. So the first policy change I would recommend is actually to ensure that irrigation is a farmer-led technology uptake. So the role of the government is really not to compete with the farmers in trying to show how irrigation works, but rather to give subsidies and incentives for the farmers to really uptake irrigation technology. One of the best examples, I think, in Kenya, we've seen a lot of farmer-led irrigation projects, and these has actually spurred more innovation and businesses to rise to ensure that farmers are able to access the irrigation equipment they need to uptake irrigation at their farm level. So the second aspect to look at is we have to acknowledge that Africa is one of the drier continents, especially the sub-Saharan region. And this means that the government also has to have some kind of policies around water scarcity and water abstraction, because it will be really unfair for a single farmer or a couple of small regional farmers to access water from an underground aquifer, for example, that can cause artificial drought in other regions. So water abstraction and guidelines have to be in place, and regulation has to be clear on how water abstraction can be managed, whether it's groundwater from rivers or underground water. The third aspect is on land tenure policies and land ownership, because I really believe that for a farmer, the first asset is the land. And if a farmer does not own the land, he does not actually have any assets to back him to, for example, get credit to invest in agriculture. So we need to have a change in policy in the land tenure system so that we empower the farmers, especially the women, who are the majority of the farmers in the continent.
Thank you, Brian. The last question around climate change and its impact on water. Africa freshwater bodies face greater stresses due to climate change, urbanization, rising demands from clean water, of course, stemming from demographic dynamics. How do we ensure that investments in irrigation also support other functions and ensure that we conserve this resource for biodiversity?
Sorry, I think for a moment I was on mute.
You couldn't hear me?
Yes, I had the question. So let me just proceed.
Please go ahead.
Yes, so I really believe that water scarcity is one of the biggest challenges that we'll be facing in the near future. And we were actually already seeing a lot of issues around water use and issues around, for example, the Nile River and the water used along different countries. And everything is attached to irrigation and farm-based water use. Secondly, most of the urban areas or urban cities that are coming up are actually along water resources. So there is always going to be a challenge managing water consumption for home-based use versus farm-based use. But we understand that irrigation is one of the biggest water, where most of the water will be used. So the first recommendation for me will be to actually encourage water reuse and water recycling through subsidies on water reuse and water recycling technologies. And a very practical example will be a city, for example, if we are building cities of the future, we have to really think, how do we then reuse the water from our homes for irrigation? Because that's a very practical way of using water. And the best way to do that, I think government can really take the first role in implementing policies that encourage such technologies. And I believe when you look at, for example, how the solar technology has really grown over time, government has played a really important role through either reducing taxes or having subsidies for such massive projects. Second aspect will be also on encouraging regulators, water regulators, whether it will be regulating water utilities, to ensure that the water infrastructure in urban areas and any other metropolis is really lossless or more efficient. Because currently Africa averages at 45% of water losses just because of poor infrastructure. So that also has to be regulated properly to ensure that every water infrastructure project is really efficient on its own. The third idea or recommendation that I will think of will be really in implementing policies around managing water use and water abstraction. Because right now we understand there's a lot of, for example, industries that have very massive water uses, and all the water, for example, will be from underground. But we understand some of these aquifers are getting diminished. So, and these are resources that cannot be replicated. cannot be refilled, for example. So there has to be a very keen policy on how the water abstraction is done by different actors, whether it is industries in urban areas or large farms or small farms in rural areas.
Thank you, Brian. Let me now hand over the floor to our friend Debussy, member as well of the panel, and currently visiting researcher at Imperial College. Debussy, the floor is yours.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Kareem. And I stand on existing protocols. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to invite my dear friend and brother, Jahil Oliver. Jahil is a founder and CEO of Hello Tractor. Hello Tractor is an ag tech startup operating across the continent, working on mechanization as a service. Jahil, are you on?
I'm here. How you doing, Debussy?
I'm very well, thank you. Okay,
good to see you, sir.
Is your camera on? I can't see you, but if it is, then we'll just carry on. Is it?
It's on my side. I don't know if
I see you now. I see you now.
Cool.
Okay,
cool.
So I'll go through two questions real quick. We are running behind schedule now. The first is, so up to 85% of the work on farms continues to be done manually. Now, mechanization's been here, or conventionally, for most parts of the world since the early 19th century. But then some people would argue that, because we have a lot of labor on farm, it creates jobs. It's a means of creating jobs and livelihood in the agriculture sector. On the other hand, it's tedious, it's burdensome, especially for women. Is it possible that we can increase mechanization while maintaining the opportunity or the value proposition for employment in the agriculture sector?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Obviously, if you increase the productivity of a grower, that opens up new opportunities up the supply chain. We're working on some projects right now with SIAT, as well as CIMIT in Zimbabwe. Debussy, you're familiar with the program with SIAT. We finally got started.
Awesome.
And we're looking at deep ripping and how that can improve productivity, provide climate resilience. And these growers are increasing their yields. These are maize growers from 1.7 metric tons per hectare, all the way to 5 metric tons. Now that increased productivity is increasing all sorts of job opportunities, not just upstream, but also income opportunities for the growers. I mean, Africa as a region is consistently one of the highest urbanizing regions on earth. That's not because jobs in the rural areas are that attractive. And it's really because the opportunities are found in these urban areas and nobody wants to do the work. And we have to be realistic about that. And in order to protect and really fill the labor gap that is becoming increasingly more pronounced with that high rate of urbanization, we have to introduce mechanization. That's what happens in most economies when there are labor shortages. We automate, we innovate, and we mechanize. That's what we did in the US, and I don't think this will be any different. And so I think it's less about displacing labor, but more about filling a labor gap. And addressing some of the scrooges in the region, like even child labor, right? Kids get pulled out of school because crops need to be established. And that also ties back to affordable access to mechanization. So I think there's some real opportunities there, and I don't think it should be seen as a negative thing, right? Net, I think it's gonna be good for the region.
Awesome. So you're saying there is a compelling value proposition for mechanization to provide even more jobs, improve livelihoods, and increase productivity. Yeah. So it's a sort of there isn't a trade-off. We're not saying mechanize at the expense of creating jobs and improving livelihoods. right?
I mean, yeah, absolutely not. I mean, okay, so I'm from the US, right? My family is from the Deep South originally. Well, originally from Africa, but settled in the Deep South.
Everyone
And
is.
you all know that with the advent of the cotton gin and new technologies, my ancestors were able to leave less than ideal situation and migrate through our version of urbanization during the Industrial Revolution to Cleveland, where I was born. That wasn't a bad thing. I don't think any of my ancestors would look back at that time period and say, man, I missed that plantation.
Right.
And I think what we fail to miss sometimes, and for those of us who don't, spend significant amounts of time in these smallholder communities, is that is not ideal work. And oftentimes it's unpaid work. So when you talk about labor displacement, you're not displacing meaningful income generating employment. You're displacing folks who are more or less trapped on that farm and not necessarily making the economic decision to be on that farm because that's the best opportunity for them.
Okay, right. I want to get in the second question before we wrap up our chat. Now, as a thought and practice leader, you're also an investor in the ag tech space and mechanization as a service. From your experience operating across the continent and of course, establishing partnerships around the world, what would you, what examples can you provide of successful partnerships? Because of course, when we talk of ag transformation, we say a public sector enabled, private sector led process, right? So you're doing the leading as private sector, but from your experience, where is the support? What's the best example, or where are the best examples of support from the public sector that have enabled the private sector, such as yourselves, to work and thrive in this space?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky question because as policymakers, you don't want to be involved with picking winners. That's a less than ideal approach to engaging and mobilizing the private sector. Although it happens all the time in the West, but crony capitalism is not something that should be a part of any government's policy, official policy. I think what I've seen that works very well, and certainly things that Hello Tractor has benefited from, is building that infrastructure, not just physical infrastructure, roads, internet connectivity. Those are all really important. Irrigation schemes, those are all really important. But also some of the other forms of infrastructure that might get overlooked, like coordinating the last mile, making transacting with smallholder farmers more profitable, so we can engage with these communities at economies of scale, build commercial models around these communities who have been organized, and oftentimes that organization can be subsidized by the state. That's what happened in the US with our extension system, right? And I think there are opportunities for that to also take place on the continent. I think the World Bank has been investing heavily in these areas through the DAT program and the 1 Million Farmer program, which we were part of. And we've already seen some benefits there. And that's helped us bring mechanization to communities who otherwise wouldn't have access, because we're not left with the burden of organizing, these 1-2 acre growers into these efficient clusters. The second piece, I recognize the work that AFDB has been doing around mobilizing investment, supporting an enabling environment for commercial investors to step in. That's how we kickstarted our pay-as-you-go tractor finance work, and attract commercial investors to grow that product into something that can scale commercially across our footprint of 13 countries in Africa. So those are kind of maybe two examples, but I think there are ample other opportunities, especially in research as well, that is a community-owned asset that companies like Hello Tractor can borrow from as we build out our technology stack. And we're constantly drinking from the CGIAR well of knowledge that's freely available and largely subsidized by the state.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ahil. So engaging with the CGIAR, tapping into the rich pool of research knowledge, building that, bridge between your product or value proposition and the last mile, working on that last mile between your consumers, and also working with continental partners such as the African Development Bank to de-risk access to affordable financial products and services. That's great. No, thank you very much for this chat. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now hand over to Dr. Lai Butake, the Director of Communications at Academia 2063. Lai, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Araba. Thank you for helping us keep to time and catch up with the rest of the agenda. So we are about to kick off a very high-level roundtable policy conversation. Just before we do that, I would like to take a minute to recognize Mr. Jean-Claude Musabimana, Permanent Secretary at Rwanda's Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Resources. And I'd equally like to remind attendees that we have simultaneous interpretation available for this meeting. Please click on the globe icon on your screen and you can choose to mute the original audio. So, the Malabo Montpellier panel has published 8 reports since 2017. And the monograph, which we are going to discuss during this roundtable discussion, focuses on 7 key thematic areas addressed in reports published by the panel. Before we get into that roundtable conversation, here is some food for thought.
Did you know that the Malabo Montpellier panel is an international panel of experts on food system transformation? Jointly facilitated by Academia 2063, Bonn University, and Imperial College London, and boasting 2 co-chairs with 16 panel members who are leading experts in agriculture, engineering, ecology, nutrition, and food security. Its core mission is to support evidence-based dialogue at the highest level and to guide policy innovation to accelerate progress towards the ambitious goals of the Malabo Declaration and the African Union Agenda 2063. This is achieved by supporting African continental initiatives and policy programs such as the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. Since 2017, the panel has released 8 reports spanning nutrition, mechanization, digitization, irrigation, energy, livestock, trade, and food systems transformation. These reports are launched at the Malabo Montpellier Forum, which is co-chaired by His Excellency Hailemariam Desalegn and Ambassador Asia Ben Saleh Alowi. The forum serves as a platform to bring research into use at cross-country or continental levels, promote dialogue, and exchange knowledge on the research evidence. This year, under the framework of the 9th Malabo Montpellier Forum, the Malabo Montpellier panel is launching a report that synthesizes its work to showcase successful policy and institutional innovations across 7 thematic areas across the continent. Amid the COVID-19 aftermath and climate change, it is time to reflect on progress, contextualize lessons learned, and scale across the continent. Get ready for groundbreaking discussions on policy innovations for food system transformation, building resilience, and adapting to climate change. Let the debate begin.
That's right. Let the debate begin. It's my absolute honor to invite once again Dr. Debisi Araba, who will be moderating the high-level roundtable. We have 45 minutes for this high-level discussion. So over to you, Dr. Araba.
Thank you very much, Dr. Butake. Well, good afternoon or hello, everyone again. It is my honor and pleasure to moderate this high-level policy conversation discussing, of course, the monograph that was launched today by the Malabo Montpellier panel. I believe all our speakers are online. We have Mr. Jean-Claude Musabimana, the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture and Animal Resources, Minagri, Rwanda. Dr. Asuko Toda, Director for Agriculture, Finance and Rural Development at the African Development Bank. Professor Mohamed Aikadi, President Conseil General de Développement Agricole, the CGDA of Morocco. Ms. Pindiwe Dingile, the Chief Director for International Relations and Trade at the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development of the Republic of South Africa. Dr. Francoise Asogba Komlan, the Secretary General, Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries, Republic du Benin, and Mr. Boaz Kizire, Head of Policy and Advocacy at the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. Well, distinguished panelists, it's a pleasure to have you all. I would like to begin, maybe we begin at the Pan-African level with Dr. Toda of the African Development Bank. So starting with the recently concluded Conference of Party Meetings of the UNFCCC in Glasgow, the African Development Bank was instrumental in mobilizing finance for climate adaptation. Now, seen as Africa's food systems are extremely vulnerable to climate change, can you share with us how the bank will ensure that finance supports not just farmers, but the broader ecosystem in the agri-food sector? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Debussy, and congratulations to the colleagues on the launching of the monograph. That's really excellent. So with regards to your question, Dr. Debussy, I think it's really important that at COP26, there was a huge emphasis on climate adaptation, because a lot of the conversation tends to be around mitigation, but for Africa, I think really the conversation was tilted towards adaptation, which was excellent. So that's first of all. Secondly, with regards to looking at the entire ecosystem, it starts with production all the way to market. So when we look at the improved seed varieties, the drought-tolerant seed varieties, the agri-inputs, the type of farming that farmers do, the irrigation systems, everything from post-harvest loss to processing, there's so many elements that need to be either looked at from a climate mitigation or a climate adaptation lens. I think for us in the African Development Bank also, we are looking at projects differently after COP26. So in a way, there are things that have been done already by the development partners and a number of players. And at the same time, I think we all stand to be resensitized to the work that needs to be done under the context of reaching the targets that have been put forward under COP26.
Thank you very much, Asuko. And it is important that we talk about climate change, which is an existential challenge, not just in the agri-food sector, but for the global economy. Of course, we will come to the issue of the global pandemic. We definitely have to touch that. Now, I want to bring on the Honorable Jean-Claude Musabimana. P.S. The Rwandan government's approach centers on encouraging private sector involvement in all activities along the value chain, as Atsuko just mentioned. Financing has to be right along the value chain. Can you give us examples of what the Rwandan government's plans are to enhance private sector investment in improving resource utilization in production, and of course, the dietary quality of food products for consumption? As we heard from the previous speaker, Jahil Oliver, talking about how we need to de-risk access to finance. What is the Rwandan government doing in this regard as it pertains to your engagement with the private sector?
Thank you, moderator, and thank you, colleagues who are participating in this conversation. And for the government of Rwanda, since our strategic plans for agricultural transformation, since years ago when we started our crop intensification program and the transformation journey of agriculture, we recognize the crucial role of the private sector in agriculture transformation. And there's the reason why for each version, now we are on the 4th version of our strategic plan for agriculture transformation, we always give a primary role on the private sector to contribute to agriculture transformation. And recently, as you know, we have conducted the food systems dialogues here in the country, where even the private sector have actively participated, and we together analyzed how they can participate in the the building sustainable food systems here in Rwanda. We went through key constraints they have. Those include, among others, the access to resources, like access to fund. There is the high risk of agriculture sector that make banks fear to lend to them. There are also infrastructure constraints and so on. And what the government is doing, first of all, we put in place a discussion platforms where we can always discuss all that happening in the sector. And in Rwanda, in the Private Sector Federation, they have a special chamber of agriculture, and that is one of our principal partner, where we discuss all matters related to private sector investment in agriculture. Then they are members of our agriculture sector working group, is where we discuss all related to the policies with them, with the donors, with the civil society, and even with other government institutions. Then what we are doing also now, we are discussing and we are supporting them to access to cheap loans. Now we are discussing with the World Bank on a project that will help private sector to access to cheap loans, because we know that for agriculture sector, it's difficult to go through the classic banking system and to access to finance. And this we're working with them to facilitate them to access those loans. We are facilitating, we are de-risking the sector by putting in place the National Agriculture Insurance Scheme, where we de-risk the loans they take from the banks. And what we are doing also, we support them by putting in place an incentive system here in Rwanda, where you have to invest. You are entitled to a kind of incentives according to the level of investment you are doing. And also in Rwanda, we are putting in place for some areas where we know that the activities will be economically viable, but not financially viable. We put in place matching grant systems where the private sector can easily access grants to match to what they want to invest in order to invest in the sectors that we consider as important, but that will not be easily financed through the private sector. But above all of this, we have responsive institutions where we can respond timely to the needs of the private sector. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, PS. And I was part of the process developing PSTA4. So I'm well aware of Rwanda's strategic institutional integration, how you integrate different ministries and parastatals, even engaging with the private sector in setting national agendas and national planning. Thank you for your comments on this. Next, I'd like to invite Ms. Pindiwe Dingile. Ms. Dingile, South Africa has a vibrant commercial livestock sector. You've just heard from the Permanent Secretary from Rwanda. But for South Africa, what role do you envisage the government playing in supporting smallholder producers? And what role do you see smallholder producers playing in the future of your agri-food sector? And how will the policy environment support this? Over to you. Please unmute. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Program Director. Good afternoon to everyone on the call, ministers, deputy ministers, international organizations, and diplomatic corps. Good afternoon. Program Director, in South Africa's agricultural economy, livestock is by far the biggest of the three subsectors. In the livestock sector, smallholder farmers make up to 40% of the total number of live animals. For now, we can proudly report that smallholder livestock farmers in South Africa are already making inroads into the mainstream of the agricultural sector. This has been made possible through the implementation of livestock development program that includes training and capacity building, which are making the environment more conducive for our smallholder farmers to participate and take advantage of the benefits that the program caters for. It is expected that the new policies, which are in different levels of refinement in our country on value chains, will enable our smallholder livestock farmers to learn more and get market access with acceptable livestock products that meet the required standards and participate in the value chains. The ongoing participation in the development of animal breeders and farmer societies, specifically in the small stock sector, further empowers our farmers to close these market gaps and create opportunities as relates to marketing and access in the developing sector. It has also been noted that numbers of the small producers in the livestock sector have recently been increasing, mainly because of the economic impact of COVID-19 restrictions, where those recently retrenched from their jobs have entered into the livestock production to sustain themselves and to contribute to their family livelihoods and to be able to produce the affordable food for their home consumptions. On noting of the challenges, Program Director, the biggest challenge associated with share of the smallholder farmers is the low intake from this subsector, making their role in the meat market and other products very, very small. As we note, the biggest challenge in this sector in respect of their low participation, smallholder farmers have a potential of still growing into the commercial sector. And what has been identified to be the impediment in their practices is that is the loss of their animal identity as they sell their products through the middlemen who then sell the product as theirs. So we have identified that as one of the gaps, and South Africa then has therefore embarked on the traceability program that has been seen to have a greater potential to resolve this challenge. And in the near future, we are seeing an increased participation into the mainstream. Furthermore, Program Director, vulnerability assessment studies on the impact of climate change have indicated that small producers are among the vulnerable groups who are unable to cope and have no means to cope with the impact of climate change. And therefore, the national environmental policies are earmarked to support all farmers, and in particular the small producers, through sector provisions under the Climate Smart Agriculture Strategic Framework and other measures that are currently being implemented to capacitate them through the programs on climate change and adaptation and mitigation. These include the biogas production projects using the integrated crop livestock system to produce biogas for smallholder farmers using the crop and livestock waste under the Renewable Energy Program. In conclusion, Program Director, the government of South Africa recognizes the vital role that the small producers, including the other vulnerable groups such as women, could play in enhancing resilience of our food system and agricultural production through adaptation, reducing and minimizing the agricultural greenhouse gas emissions and safeguarding the national food security, and has developed, therefore, the support mechanisms through development of appropriate policies, strategies, including our master planning process that involves both our commercial and smallholder farmers. I thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dingile. That was great to hear the perspectives of South Africa and how you are coping not just with COVID-19, the global pandemic, but also helping smallholder farmers adapt in this evolving climate change scenario that the whole world finds itself in. I want to quickly bring back Dr. Asuka Toda of the African Development Bank on this Pan-African context. Dr. Toda, the African Development Bank has been lauded by the UN Secretary General, no less, for investing, I think it's about 63% of financing towards adaptation in climate financing. So the African Development Bank is a global leader in allocating funding for adaptation finance. But I want to combine this question in two areas. Can you tell us a bit more about your strategy for adaptation finance, especially as it pertains to rural finance? But also, what is the bank's strategy for supporting countries as they recover from the shocks from the global pandemic? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Divisi, for that question. With regards to what the bank is doing, I think what was very important is to have a climate change action plan. So it is easy to mainstream climate change related activities into all the projects. So that we can develop new projects, but there's always now a very strong climate angle, and there's also measurements and metrics to ensure that we're monitoring for the aspects of climate change. That's one. Two, with regards to the need and priorities, and I think Lawrence highlighted it also, we are going on a resource mobilization drive to really look at supporting research, i.e. how do we actually try to get more impact with the research that's being carried out by the CGIAR system, as well as understanding existing technologies that are climate adapted that can be applied to scale. So the point is really more about going to scale with technologies and identifying that research that has been done in the context of climate. And then thirdly, I'd like to say also that it's really about working with partners. That's extremely important because we realize platforms like this one are ways to be able to, number one, advocate with policymakers, but number two, to be able to work with partners together on this important agenda. And I think as countries come out of COVID, it's really about the development agenda, not the humanitarian assistance, but the development agenda to ensure that Africa can feed Africa. Thank you, Divisi.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Asuko. Boaz, my dear brother. Now, you've heard from these eminent speakers what's going on in countries, what's going on around the world, what other Pan-African institutions are doing. Now, we know we have multiple platforms, or shall we say commitments. How do we align all these? We have the AU Agenda 2063, of course, we have the UN SDGs, we have your baby, which is CAADP, we have the Malabo Declaration. What do we need to do to ensure that we are aligning all our focus on all these objectives and strategies to ensure that we improve shared prosperity for all Africans? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Adebisi. Always good to see you, and this time virtually, but we need to meet physically and we exchange more about this topic. So thank you so much. Just to indicate that, yes, first of all, Africa was demonstrated a huge commitment to the whole food systems discussions. And just to give a clear understanding of what this meant, because the whole food systems summit and the work was under the construct of the UN, which is a member state organization. And Africa had a clear engagement plan through an African mechanism and through an Africa common position. So as AGRA, as an institution, and not because Agnes Kalibata as a UN food systems envoy was engaged, but as an organization, we're also engaged, but particularly and partnered with the NEPAD Planning and Coordination Agency that was required to lead the actions on the food systems summit on the continent together with the African Union. So we picked a number of things that we are part of. One, be part of the national dialogues. Two, to make sure that we are undertaking diagnostics, be able to shape the kind of game-changing ideas, then supporting the regional dialogues, but also trying to sieve through what the scientific community that was led by Joachim von Braun was leading. So to your good point, a lot of things emerged, and it definitely raises questions. What does this mean when it comes to taking it down to country level? And it has been a question for quite a number of people across the continent and beyond. But as Africa, as you very well know, CAADP has really been a very strong instrument that has shaped and brought almost 55 member states into the same framework. So we've been engaging and discussing with the countries, what does it mean at the country level? One is to make sure that we begin to translate pathways or action areas and ideas into the national planning and implementation systems. For CAADP, as you very well know, we had the CAADP National Agriculture and Food Security Investment Plans, where the food systems has discussions have emerged and told us is that some of these issues go beyond the Ministry of Agriculture that has been the primary host of the CAADP and Agricultural Investment Plan. And that brings a particular small challenge of intersector and interinstitutional coordination. And thanks to the government, and I'm really happy that over 20 heads of states directly get involved and even speaking at the Food Systems Summit, meaning the trickle-down effect is much more stronger because there were over 48 countries that were engaged in the food systems work with the national representation. So what that means is all the proposals and ideas and the pathways and action areas that have been proposed have to begin to get into the national agriculture and food systems investment plans. We've been thinking about developing like a food system investment plan. But remember, if you have an investment plan, it has to cut across different institutional homes. So what does this mean? And CAADP has already created a mechanism of how you design investment plans. Different countries are different stages of national investment plans. At this stage, we are trying to engage with all the countries to see at what stage of your revision of the national investment plan are you? Can you be able to integrate emerging issues that are coming out of the Food Systems Summit? Very good enough. The 2021 CAADP biannual review is coming up with very strong recommendations that are speaking the food system work. So there is home and appetite for countries to absorb and accommodate the new emerging ideas from the Food Systems Summit to be integrated in the priority actions at the country level. And we're also trying to make sure that countries are also going to integrate food systems related indicators that originally could have missed into the national CAADP 47 investment plans that the biannual review is tracking. So we have an instrument of tracking and accountability mechanism that any food systems related issue is not only planned for and put in the national investment plan, but it is also tracked and measured according to what it is. And the other good news is that because national CAADP and biennial review is not just the Ministry of Agriculture, because heads of state are going to be meeting in January, February at the summit next year.
Yes.
They are going to be discussing the emerging outcomes of the 2021 biennial review. They are going to be reflecting on what, because the theme of the summit is going to be around food systems as well on that particular topic. So the appetite and the room for having these issues brought on board at the country level is extremely high. And we don't want to miss the opportunity to make sure that they are crossing into the tracking mechanism that is already established. So that is happen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Boaz. And it's great to hear that food systems, agriculture and food systems will be a main feature of the AU Summit coming up early next year, as Africa, of course, prepares to host COP27 in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, where we also hope that agriculture and food systems will feature prominently. So it's great to hear that there are efforts to synthesize and integrate these Pan-African objectives into a strategic process. Honorable Francoise Assogba-Komlan, I would like to pose a question to you, but before I do, I would like to inform the members of the audience that we do have translation services. There's a button there. When you click it, you can select the language of your preference. And here's my question. In Benin, we heard from in the fireside chat between Karim and Brian, the potential to expand land in Benin under irrigation is very high. Studies have shown that large-scale irrigation systems can potentially be increased to 1.6 million hectares with a rate of return of 6%. While small-scale irrigation systems can potentially be increased by 0.1 million hectares with a rate of return of 8%. Institution and programmatic commitments for increasing irrigation uptake in Benin have contributed largely to this progress. Now, can you share with us some of the initiatives that you have taken in your government to increase irrigation uptake in the country, especially how you have tried to support the private sector on this? The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, merci Monsieur Adébisi Araba. Bonjour à tout le monde, peut-être bonsoir, ça dépend de là où on se situe. Et merci d'avoir associé le Bénin à la discussion. Et dans le cadre du 9e Forum Malabo. Vous savez, au niveau du Bénin, en 2016, l'irrigation est vraiment considérée comme un moyen d'intensification de l'agriculture. Et elle contribue à augmenter la productivité tout en réduisant les risques de sécheresse et aussi les problèmes de changement climatique. Nous avons, dans un premier temps, au niveau du Bénin, décidé d'élaborer un programme national de développement de l'irrigation. Au niveau du PAG, du programme d'action du gouvernement, dès le départ, un programme phare qui s'occupe de l'aménagement basse et moyenne vallée de l'Ouémé. C'est un projet qui tient vraiment à cœur au gouvernement et des dispositions sont prises pour qu'il y ait un développement à grande échelle pour permettre l'irrigation au niveau de tout de nos terres. Le programme a prévu l'aménagement de 50 000 hectares de périmètre irrigué avec maîtrise totale de l'eau. Aujourd'hui, nous avons déjà démarré avec 12 000 hectares où toutes les études sont presque en cours et d'APS et APD, bien sûr, sont en cours. C'est prévu retenue et réhabilitation de 150 anciennes retenues d'eau. C'est un programme assez MAUS qui rentre dans le cadre du programme d'action du gouvernement deuxième génération. La première génération, il y a des projets qui ont été prévus et mis en œuvre au niveau de la vallée de l'Ouémé. Et ces programmes ont vraiment projet que j'avais cité tantôt, la mise en valeur de la base. En dehors de ces projets, il y a beaucoup d'autres projets, une dizaine environ, qui ont été mis en œuvre avec le financement de l'AD, du FIDA, de l'AFD, en réalité d'avoir accès à l'eau au niveau de presque tout le pays. Les dispositions du gouvernement dans le cadre nous ont amenés à mettre en ordre, parce que c'est d'eux qu'ils les jeunes se mettent en place et les problèmes qui sont déjà là de ces mises en réseau des zones, c'est les problèmes fonciers, les problèmes de la qualité de l'eau. Mais tout ça, l'État est en train de mettre en place des systèmes pour alléger un peu la situation. Nous avons au niveau du Bénin une structure aujourd'hui appelée la SONAMA qui embrasse vraiment le nouveau champ de l'irrigation et qui importe l'irrigation pour permettre aux agriculteurs et aussi aux gens de superficie de se mettre à la tâche et de travailler en toute saison. Et les défis, comme je le disais, sont énormes parce que les petits producteurs, ils ont un problème financier et donc mais l'acquisition du petit matériel pose problème et la Sonama se met à disposition pour importer ces petits matériels et permettre aux petits d'aller vers l'agriculture en toute sécurité. Aujourd'hui, nous avons un programme des grandes cultures d'alimentation qui va utiliser à grande échelle l'irrigation et qui fait des concessions, qui va concéder des parcelles à ceux-là qui veulent vraiment rentrer dans l'agriculture. L'État, à l'amont, va mettre en place un système et donner la possibilité aux jeunes et aux personnes voulant se lancer dans l'agriculture pour vraiment travailler dans ce sens. Et surtout, c'est les grandes cultures comme l'ananas, l'EVA, ces cultures-là qui seront vraiment prises en compte. J'avais parlé tantôt du problème foncier, qui est un problème assez important. Des cultures, il faut s'assurer que le foncier est garanti et l'État facilite aussi l'État facilite en prenant des dispositions au niveau des communes et au niveau des zones qui sont pour l'instant pas... je crois que pour cette première question, voilà ce que je peux vraiment dire.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for the intervention explaining the multiple programs that Benin has in supporting the private sector. Particularly liked your attention to the land allocation, working around land ownership, land titling, etc. This is important to create that economic base or asset base for smallholder farmers to invest. Of course, it gives them the confidence to invest in irrigation systems or get into contract farming, etc. Dr. Aikadi, I'd like to bring you on now to share your perspectives on Morocco. Now, for those who haven't visited, I think Morocco is essential. Should be essential for anybody who is mobile and travels across the continent of Africa. The green miracle that you're building in Morocco through the Green Vert Morocco plan and several other initiatives that you have made significant inroads in addressing the challenges of not just food security, but making Morocco a net exporter of food and creating this agri-food powerhouse in the north of Africa. How will Moroccan institutions that oversee these sectors consolidate these advances that you've achieved within a broader food systems transformation network? The second part is, what's next for you? What should we expect to hear from Morocco, even as we go into 2022 in the need to build resilience and, of course, transform food systems? Over to you.
Do you hear me, DVC? Hello,
yes,
do you hear me?
Go on. Yes, we can hear you.
Well,
please go on, Dr. Aikadi.
Thank you. It's so nice to see you again. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in this panel and very much pleased to share the stage with my distinguished co-panelists. Yes, Morocco has implemented its agricultural strategy 2008-2020, whose name Green Morocco Plan expresses the great hope we have pinned on sustainable agricultural development. It was, for us, a major turning point, marked by a fundamental paradigm shift, which aimed to put Moroccan agriculture in a virtuous spiral of inclusive and sustainable progress. Green Morocco Plan was considered the drive to transform our agriculture into a globally competitive, inclusive, and business-oriented sector that creates wealth, generates gainful employment, and improves livelihood. Green Morocco Plan also addressed the issue of social vulnerability in relation to poverty and the precariousness of small family farms. It constitutes, in my view, a real break with the dominant models of interventions followed in different parts of the world over the last 50 years, and which, in my view, have contributed by their standardization to an impoverished vision of agricultural development, perpetuating precariousness and largely inhibiting an innovation potential based on the richness of diversity, the mobilization of actors, and the adaptation to market opportunities. So a new vision and business model for smallholder agriculture and rural development were adopted to create economic and job opportunities and make rural areas more attractive places to live. I'm pleased to say that Green Morocco Plan has already changed agriculture, and the economic results show that its principle and its programs result in better performance. Indeed, the structuring actions of the Green Morocco Plan have generated a real dynamism in the agricultural sector, thanks to the sustained increase of the agricultural investment, which have been multiplied by 4. And 60% of these investments are private investments. And this has been leveraged by a set of which I dare to call smart subsidies. The structural transformation of the sector is also perceptible by the significant appreciation of its added value and export earnings, both of which have more than doubled. This positive impetus has contributed to improved income and living conditions in the rural areas. So what are the keys for success? In my view, the first one is that government asserts its leadership role in guiding agricultural sector reforms, including building stronger partnerships with the private sector and farmers' organizations. We regularly invite producer organizations, representatives as equal partners in the formulation and implementation of policies and development programs. Second, you need to establish an appropriate policy framework and supportive linkages between sectors to ensure maximum effectiveness of development efforts. Third, you need to adopt integrated policies to foster sustainable use of soils, water, forest, and biodiversity to promote economic and environmental performance and preservation of ecosystem as well as to enable effective agricultural adaptation to climate change, which you have just mentioned. You need also to make innovation a priority in order to achieve sustainable productivity growth and resilience, including through institutional change, greater public and private investment in research and development, technology transfer and adoption, education and training, advisory service, and South-South cooperation. We are very much committed to South-South cooperation. We need to invest in portfolios of sequenced projects that combine institutions, regulations and incentives, information systems, and infrastructure. We need to adapt financial and investment services to the needs of each category of farmers. Our Agriculture Credit Bank has designed a comprehensive set of instruments that is adapted to each category of farmer, from microcredit all the way to large-scale credits for value chains. And last but not least, you need to foster greater resilience of farmers to risk to enable them to cope with more frequent and predictable weather-related shocks through drought and multi-risks insurances. So for your question, DBC, I would like to say, and by saying that a new agricultural strategy named Green Generation 2020-2030 is now being implemented. It is a two-pronged strategy. Its two priorities are: one, sustainability of Morocco's food systems, building on the achievements of the previous strategy, developing modern and efficient distribution channels, focusing on quality, innovation, and green tech, and fostering more resilient and eco-efficient agriculture through, for example, increasing water efficiency and improving soil health and conservation. And most importantly is this second priority, which is human development. Human development through the development of a new generation of rural middle class, accompanied by the generalization of social protection, a new generation of young agri-entrepreneur. I dare to say that this Green Generation strategy is youth-centric, a new generation of agricultural organization. We expect that 30% of the public budget of the sector will be run by farmer organizations and professional organizations. So, and last but not least, a new generation of support measures, such as connecting 2 million farmers to e-services and mobilizing more than 5,000 agricultural advisors. Thank you, and over to you, Denis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aikadi. I think it's heartwarming to hear of the Green Generation 2020 to 2030. It might as well be a youth generation 2020 to 2030, as you've expressed. We also, of course, it would be remiss of us not to congratulate His Excellency Aziz Akanouch, a good friend of the Malabo Montpellier panel and the MaMo Forum. His Excellency Akanouch was recently appointed as the Prime Minister of Morocco. He was previously the Minister of Agriculture from 2007 to 2021. So we expect no less than excellence from you and your colleagues in government. And we wish you the very best, even as you begin to implement the Green Generation Strategy 2020 to 2030. With this, I would like to thank our esteemed panel members, panelists, audience, guests, for following us so far. I would like to hand the microphone now to Dr. Lai Batake to give us following instructions. Dr. Batake, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Araba, for that insightful session, and thank you to all our esteemed panel members. So now we are going to have a very short break of about 3 to 4 minutes. But before going on the break, I'd like to invite all the panelists to turn on their videos so that we can capture a few seconds to immortalize the event before we go to the break. Thank you very much, dear attendees, dear panelists. We're going to take a short break of 3 minutes and we'll be right back.